I would like to say before I introduce our wonderful speaker that we have to be very nice to her today because, yeah, she just presented to our diversity series. So we have a diversity series that runs Friday afternoon from 1 to 2:30. And Ginger was kind enough, she was on tap to do that. And then our speaker who had to cancel left an opening. And so we asked Ginger if she would step in and fill in for our forum today. So we're very, very grateful to Ginger for doing that. Ginger has a really interesting background, and she's going to be talking a lot about it today. But basically, her family came to Sacramento in 1952 when she was 4 years old. She went off to college to Howard University. She came back to the West Coast. She began her career in journalism, working with KRON TV, and then with, that was in San Francisco, and KCRA TV in Sacramento. I think most of us know Ginger as the editorial writer, one of the editorial writers for the Sacramento Bee for 25 years. She started in 1988 and retired in 2013. But retirement has given her some time to work on her mother's book, which was first published in 1963. Ginger's done a lot of work on it. Her books, her book, When We Were Colored, and her mother's book, No Crystal Stare, are on sale. So we have a gentleman here who can sell you a copy if you'd like to acquire one. Very interesting books. Full disclosure, Ginger is in my book club, and we read these books, and very, very entertaining reading, good reading. So Ginger is welcome to our Renaissance Society Forum. We're happy to have you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. I think I've got a lavalier. I'm good.
You got to put that
I got to put it on. Sorry, guys. I'm gonna get this in. Can you hear me? Okay, that's fine. Anyway, my name is Ginger Rutland. I did not write any books. I didn't write any of these books. The book I'm talking about today was written by my mother. It was originally published in 1963. It was not called When We Were Colored, A Mother's Story. It was called The Trouble with Being a Mama. When my father, I feel like I just said this, but anyway, too bad. If you heard it before, too bad. You're hearing it again. So when my father died in 2005, I read a portion of the book at his funeral. Everybody wanted it, right? And it had been out of print for many years, so I decided to republish it. I changed the title because I thought The Trouble with Being a Mama was boring. And I changed it to When We Were Colored, A Mother's Story. Some people find that word colored a pejorative. I don't. It was the polite phrase for Black people when I was growing up. And I always thought it was rather nice. Anyway, so my sisters and brothers were angry that I changed the title, but I was doing all the work, so who cares, right? And I also tarted the book up with family photos, which were not in the original book. So this was a cover, and my question for you, you can't, because I already told you, who am I in this picture?
Pretty one.
Okay. Who thinks I'm my brother? No. Who thinks I'm the baby in my mother's lap? Who thinks I'm the baby in my father's lap?
Yes.
Who thinks I'm my big sister? No, that is my big sister. That is my twin sister, Patty Jo, my brother, Billy. And yes, I am the baby in the in my father's lap. So let's see, I got to figure out how to change this. And how do I do that? Do I do that? Okay. Okay, the right arrow. The when I published the original book was published by a real publisher, big deal. This book I published it myself, and I had to create a publishing company. I called the publishing company IWP. IWP stands for Isaac Westmoreland Press Book Publishers. Isaac Westmoreland was my great-grandfather. Isaac, that's where the picture comes from, the little logo. Anyway, Isaac Westmoreland was born a slave. We've calculated that he probably gained his freedom right at the Civil War. He was probably about 37 years old. As a slave, he was trained as a bootmaker, a cobbler. And after the Civil War, he built a big house in Atlanta, Georgia, and opened a bookmaking shop, and he actually did quite well. This is Isaac Westmoreland's family at the turn of the century. So all the young people in this picture are the first generation of my family on my mother's side born outside of slavery. And what I think is remarkable about this picture is that my great-grandfather had 11 children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood. And he was able to send all 9 of them to college. So the lady in the top row standing with the part in the middle of her hair is my grandmother, Eva Westmoreland Neal. I look at this picture because I have a daughter who doesn't look very much like me, but she looks just like this picture of my grandmother, which says, "Oh, yes, you are me, aren't you?" And this is the Atlanta University football team of 1900. You can see the double aught on the football there. 2 of my mother's uncles are in this picture. This is Uncle Ike, number 10 there, and the guy in the back there with the part in the middle of his hair is Uncle Julius. Uncle Ike became a dentist. Uncle Julius was a businessman who did quite well, went to Boston, made a lot of money, and lost it all, my understanding is, during the Big Depression. But this is Atlanta University, and these young men are on that football team, and what I'm struck by is their posture. This is these guys were the Black elite of the day. The normal narrative when we talk about Black people is that they're from the rural South, that they were picking cotton, that they were uneducated, and they were servile. But within the Black community, there was a strata of upper class and middle class Blacks. These folks belong to that upper strata, and you can tell by their posture, right? It says quite clearly, "I am somebody." No saggy pants, no backward baseball hats. This was the Black elite. And I want to be clear that this is not the Black story, right? We were not a monolith. We were very much like white people. There were different socioeconomic groups within us, and there were the doctors and the lawyers and the dentists and the so on and so on and so forth, and the businessmen. And these people were part of the upper classes in the Black society. And it's a narrative that's very seldom depicted in modern media today. And my mother, who was sort of tired of the endless stories of poverty and violence and stuff, when she wrote this book was sort of interesting. I want to tell you my story, my Black story, which is not the one that's usually told. This is my grandmother when I knew her, and see the brooch she's wearing? I have it. My sisters didn't get it, I got it, that's all. That's the next story. This is her degree from Atlanta University. She was mainly a housewife, frankly, most of her life, but she graduated in 1900. She was a school teacher, and she taught night school. My mother remembers going with her to night school, and she taught mainly ex-slaves how to read and write. This is my grandfather. His name was Samuel Neal. He was a pharmacist. This is his degree from pharmacy school. It's Shaw University. He graduated in 1906. He was probably one of the first Black pharmacists licensed in Georgia or anywhere, frankly. But Something I was going to say here that was important. I forgot what it was I was going to say. Anyway, that was my grandfather, a pharmacist. And this is the encyclopedia of 1910-11. And I include this in my program because I want to show you the definition of Negro in that while these young men that you saw that were part of the football team and saw they were hot stuff, while my grandfather was working as a pharmacist, while my grandmother had just graduated from college, this is what the wider world thought about them. This is the definition of Negro in the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1910. It says, mentally, the Negro is inferior to the white. The arrest or even deterioration in mental development is no doubt very largely due to the fact that after puberty, sexual matters take the first place in the Negro's life and thoughts. So this was the settled science of the day. I'm sure you would find equally insulting definitions of Asians, Indians, Jews, you name it, but this was eugenics and it was the settled science of the day. Into this world, where maybe the wider world didn't think well of her or her people, my mother was born. She was born in 1917. She was the only daughter. She had two older brothers, but she was the only daughter of her father, the pharmacist, Dr. Samuel Neal, and his wife, Eva Westmoreland Neal. Anyway, and my mother went to segregated schools all of her life. This was the public school that she went to. Later, she would transfer to a private school on the Atlanta University campus, but this was her public elementary school. And she is the little girl in the smack dab in the middle in the bottom row. And she is scowling, as you can tell. My mother was 95 years old when she died. And she was blind. She'd been blind since age 50. But she remembered this picture and she remembered why she was scowling. She did not want to be in the front row. She didn't want to be in the front row because, she already knows this, she's heard the story before, because her socks were soiled. You can see that, right? But she let the teacher know she was unhappy with the placement, right? This is my mother when she was about 12 or 13. And I include this picture because one, I think she looks beautiful, but also I think what's most important, she looks happy. The idea of the South in the Jim Crow era and Black folks and stuff is that everybody was scared and depressed and things were awful. My mother had a happy childhood, right? She was loved, she was protected, she was cherished even. So I think this sort of demonstrates that, or at least exemplifies that. This is my mother on the year she graduated from Spelman College. It was 1937. Spelman College is the Black women's college in Atlanta. It's still there. It's the sister college of Morehouse, which is the men's college, where, Morehouse was where King went, Martin Luther King. Anyway, that's my mother's graduation picture from Spelman. She graduated in 1937. She majored in economics. She became an accountant. She was really trained to be an accountant. And her minor was drama. She loved theater. She was on the stage at Spelman along with a Morehouse guy all the time. She was quite an actress at the time. This is my mother's engagement picture that was in the Atlanta Daily World. The Atlanta Daily World was the Black newspaper of Atlanta. And it said something like, "Oh, Miss Eva Elsie Neal, the daughter of Dr. Samuel Neal and his wife, Eva Westmoreland Mill, is going to marry Bill Rutland of Detroit, Michigan, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, this was on the society pages of the Atlanta Daily World in 1943, which was the year my parents married. This seems sort of out of place. Anyway, they married during the war. And my father courted my mother at Tuskegee. Tuskegee was where they trained Black pilots for the first time. Two of my mother's cousins, grandsons of the slave that I introduced at the beginning, were Tuskegee pilots. This was Charles Westmoreland, and this was Fred Thunderberg. Both were killed in the war over Europe. Both were shot down, which I think is rather sad and rather remarkable. This is my parents' wedding. They were married in my great-grandfather's home, that big home he built in Atlanta. Her mother inherited that home, and that's where they got married in 1943. My father started his career during the Second World War at Tuskegee. He was a civilian. He worked in logistics. You know, the guy who says part A and part B are coming here. We got to have a mechanic that knows how to put part A and part B together. And he worked in logistics all his life. But his career began at Tuskegee. He was there at the very beginning when they were just building the barracks. But he was never in the military. He was always a civilian. And soon after they married, they had a bunch of kids, right? This is post-World War II. This is our family in Sacramento. And my father's favorite president was Harry Truman, because Harry Truman integrated the armed services and civil service. So my father was able to keep his good government job. And as the Air Force expanded and the Cold War sort of expanded and logistics bases all over the country expanded, he was transferred to Sacramento, California. So that was 1952. So this is our family picture, probably in 1952 when we first came to Sacramento. I always call it, looks like a toothpaste ad, doesn't it? We all had good teeth back then. Anyway. And these are more cute baby pictures. I don't know why they're in this order, but I want to talk about, I'm going to read now from the book, and I just want to talk about, my mother wrote all of her life, but she started writing for the leading ladies magazines of the day. Ladies Home Journal, Red Book Magazine, Woman's Day. She had articles in all of those magazines, which was pretty remarkable for a Black woman in the 50s. She combined all of those articles into a book, which she called The Trouble with Being a Mama, which I changed to When We Were Colored. And she thought of her audience. My mother was afraid to come to California, frankly. She had been raised in the segregated South, but she had been protected, right? And loved and taken care of and so forth. And her children were going to go to an integrated California. And she was afraid that those white people out there were going to be mean to them. And she looked at the audience that she was writing for as white mothers. And she wanted to tell those white mothers that her children were just as fragile, just as precious, and just as fragile as theirs. Please be kind to them. So I'm going to read one of the stories from this book, which I think illustrates how she was able to do this. This is a story about my older sister, Elsie. Elsie was 8. She was the oldest when she came, and she was sort of more aware of race and all of that than the rest of us. Now Elsie is in the house. It's after school and she's waiting for a white friend that she has met at school to come play with her. I looked at Elsie leaning against the window and thought of what Janie had done to her in the past few months, and not intentionally. At least, I don't think it was intentional. Little children aren't clever enough to be that cruel. For every day at school, she would play with Elsie, and every day she would walk home with her as far as a certain corner where she would turn off because her mother might see her. And her mother didn't allow her to play with Negroes because Negroes were dirty, Negroes were loud and uncouth, Negroes can't be trusted, etc. All explained in exquisite detail to Elsie. Every day, Elsie would come home crying, and Billy would explain, Janie's been talking about colored people again. Now Elsie stood against the window. No jeans today. She had to remain neat, please. And Billy, get your crayons up, please. Neat, clean, ready for inspection. Oh, Janie, please come, I implored. Please let her, I asked Janie's mother, and my heart ached for the neat girl still in school clothes, leaning against the window, a tiny paragon of virtue, a defense for the whole Negro race, a battalion ready to batter down all the bigotry and stupidity ground into Janie's mother for 2 centuries. She looked so little, so defenseless. What do you say? Where was all my big talk? Come, help me peel the potatoes, I said. She may come later. Elsie turned from the window. She, too, knew that Janie would not come. What did you do at school today? I asked to divert her, but she was not to be diverted. Janie says Negroes shouldn't be in this neighborhood anyway. Her mother is very careful about her. She can't play with Chinese or Negroes or... Here the bottled up tears spilled over and she cried plaintively, Oh, I wish I wasn't colored. Elsie, I said, don't ever say that. But I do, she screamed. I hate Janie. No, I thought, please, Janie, don't infect Elsie. Elsie, listen to me, I implored. You mustn't hate Janie, just feel sorry for her. Her mother isn't very understanding. She doesn't know the real values. She doesn't yet know how to judge people on their character. So she bases her judgment on false values like color of skin or cash in their pockets or something like that. Do you see? Yes, I see, she said. Then, Mama, who can't I play with? Why, Elsie, I answered, you can play with anybody. Anybody? You mean real black people too? Anybody, I said firmly. Oh, Mama, she asked anxiously, aren't there maybe some Indians that don't speak English that I couldn't play with? I folded her in my arms then, and my tears came too. Oh, Elsie, baby, look, you mustn't be silly because other people are. That isn't the American way. We judge people by the kind of people they are inside, whether they are kind and good, but not how they look or speak. I hope she understood. I couldn't be sure. I cuddled her, I wiped her tears, and presently she put on her jeans and went outside. I could only hope. At any rate, I think that is a perfect illustration of any mother dealing with a child who's been hurt, right? When they get to a certain age, you're not in a position to help them, whether they're bullied for whatever reason. And kids, white kids, black kids, all kids, sometimes face bullying. And you, as a mother, are not in a position to protect them from that. Next picture. My brother, isn't he cute? Elsie again. Next. Now, can you tell who my dad is in this picture? This is about when we came to Sacramento in 1952. And one of the difficulties for Black people in Sacramento or Oakland or Los Angeles or Chicago or New York, wherever, was buying a house. Because of restrictions on deeds, you just couldn't buy a house. And my parents desperately wanted to buy a good house in a nice neighborhood, and they were unable to do that. And finally, my parents did what a lot of Black middle-class people did. They got a white friend to buy the house for them. So the white friend in this case was this guy right here, and I've forgotten his name. It slipped out of my head. But at any rate, the guy to my father's right bought a lot in Southland Park Hills that they would not sell to my parents, and then immediately sold it to my parents, and they built their house and sort of punched their key into the middle classes, which was common in those days. But this is what was on the deeds in many of the neighborhoods. No part of any of said lots shall at any time be rented, leased, subleased, or sublet to, or to be occupied or used by, say, person of either Hindu, African, Japanese, Chinese, or Mongolian descent. In some of these, it was also Jews were also denied the right to buy homes in certain neighborhoods. So if you want to understand where Black people live and why they live in certain places in this country, you know that it was this kind of restrictions. Even you know, the GI Bill couldn't be used to buy homes if you were the wrong color. And for me, it's interesting because for so many of us, the home that we inherit is part of a generational wealth thing that you pass on from generation to generation. And I see my white friends inheriting houses that my parents couldn't touch, you know, that cost $30,000, but now are $1 million, right? And that sort of generational wealth is denied to a huge swath of Black folks. And that explains a lot about where people are today. Next story is my dad again. I want to end it sort of here. I want to read one more thing. My mother also wrote in this book a defense of Black men. The image of Black men, both in her day and frankly today, is a little insulting, you know, that they are oversexed, that they're violent, that they don't take care of their family, that they're all kinds of negative things. But her experience with her great-grandfather, with her father, with her grandfather, with her father, her grandfather, the ex-slave, with her father, the pharmacist, who sometimes worked as a bellhop in order to support the family during the Depression and things like that. Dining car waiter, he worked as well on a train. They had all protected her all of her life. And so she wrote a chapter in this book called The Trouble with Papa. And it's about my dad. And I always begin this with a word of warning. My father used colorful language, including the N-word. And when we republished this book, we said to Mom, hey, maybe we should, you know, change that. And she said, no, Dad wouldn't be Dad without that word. So we left it in. So if any of you are offended, you have to talk to my mom or my dad, both of whom are dead. So you're going to have a hard time. So anyway, here's the story. Speaking of report cards, reminds me of one outsider whom Bill was hard on, James Meredith. I don't know if you guys know, but James Meredith was the first Black man to knowingly integrate the University of Mississippi. When the rumor, and I'm everlastingly glad it was just a rumor, came out in the press that James Meredith had flunked out and would have to leave the University of Mississippi, I thought Bill would have apoplexy. It started out innocently enough, small talk at the dinner table. Gee, says Elsie, the paper says Meredith will have to leave Mississippi on account of his grades. There's no excuse under God's heaven for it, says Bill, the low-down, lazy, good-for-nothing. Now, just a minute, say I, give credit where credit is due. He risked his life, and 2 men lost theirs to get him in, and the whole United States Army was behind him. He's got no right to flunk out. Everybody can't get straight A's, says Ginger. My husband gets louder. Not asking for straight A's. A simple C will keep you in. A nigger can't afford to fail. He's got as much right as a white man, say I. They say Mississippi's just a good time school for those who can't make it anywhere else. A nigger's got no right to fail. At this, he jumps up and pounds the table and turns on Billy. And don't you forget it. If you bring me any more D's, I'll knock your cotton picking. And we quiet down as Papa roars. And thank you, Mr. Meredith, for not flunking out. Later, he roars privately to me. Don't you dare plant the idea in my children that it's all right to fail. A nigger's got to win. He's got to be on top. Then I remember that is he who is facing the outside world. And I remember that it was not and is not always a charming, glamorous world. I remember the time in a borderline town when he and a white buddy entered a cafeteria and Bill was turned away. I remember that my husband was calm and dignified. It was the buddy who raved, a man who was seeing discrimination personally for the first time in his life and became, as Bill said, another converted white man. I remember the conference in Kentucky that Bill conducted with a leading airplane production company, and the elaborate luncheon the company had arranged for in advance. 15 men seated at the dining table. All received menus except Bill. Bill, absorbed in conversation, hardly noticed. Then, as the others began to order, he asked the waitress quietly for a menu. Then came the always shocking, no matter how many times you hear it, "I'm sorry, I can't serve you." But this time, from the company representative comes, "What's the matter, Bill?" His indignation, the hurried consultation with the manager who babbles about policy, precedent. This time, 15 men arise and walk out. 15 men representing a powerful company that sustains that town. And as they watch them go, the waitress and the manager are a little disconcerted, as people always are when discrimination affects their bread and butter. You get the feeling it won't happen again, and you are a little thrilled that the capable Negro man who has helped to open another door is your husband. And if you are that man's wife, you begin to understand why he roars, what he is saying to your children. It is, "I love you. I want you to be happy, to be respected." The age-old cry of the Negro father, the slave that bowed and toiled and did the white man's bidding, that his little brown babies might eat. The newly freed black man who waited tables and carried bags, that his children might be educated. A little further up the ladder, the teachers and preachers who planted a dignity, an idea to stand up, black boy, be proud, and walk straight into the doors of the universities of Mississippi and Georgia, to the front of the bus, to anywhere you want to go. I know at last what my husband is roaring about. The doors are open. Be ready. So that's almost the end. This is my parents at their 50th wedding anniversary. So everything sort of went okay, right? My twin sister Patty Jo is there. She's a lawyer and she has two beautiful sons. They live in Laguna Beach. They live the life. One son is a quite eminent doctor. And then that's me. I became a journalist and I have a daughter who's given me two beautiful grandsons. They're so cute. And then my brother Billy is a big time lobbyist in town and he has a son and a daughter. The daughter you're going to see in this next thing, she's an actress. She's really good. And then my other sister, Elsie, was a social worker all her life, working in foster care and adoptions. And my parents, my father died in 2005 and my mother died in 2012, and I miss them. That's it.
So the football team picture, who's the guy in the bowler hat in back?
I have
It looked like a white guy to me, but a couple of those guys looked like they could have passed the football team.
A lot of people in my mother's family passed. Some of them passed right away. And I mean, one of the things, yeah, a lot of them passed. Anyway, yeah. And a lot of the reason is that white slave owners who who fathered black children were not always cruel and evil, and sometimes they gave them advantages. The great grandfather that I talk about, his father was the slave owner, and I think he helped him make a life after slavery. Yeah.
So when you and your siblings moved to California, I think you said so did you all go to segregated schools at any time, or were they always
No.
integrated?
My older sister did when she was 8 when she came, but the school that she went to actually we were living in Ohio, was segregated. In fact, she just told me a couple of years ago she told me a couple of days ago, I didn't even know this, that there was a school across the street from them that was the regular public school, but she and my older brother were put on a bus and sent across town to the black schools. So this was even in Ohio.
Okay, and then how about the grand children and grand nieces and nephews? Were they going to segregated schools, or are they?
My children, no. They grew up in Sacramento. I grew up in Sacramento. They went to McClatchy High School, Cal Middle School, Country Day, and all my nephews went to Christian Brothers. I mean, we lived in Sacramento.
So I guess you sort of answered part of my question about your great grandfather, how his father helped him some. So, but I was thinking that he after slavery ended, he became a publisher. Is that correct?
No. I created a publishing company, which I called IWP. I used his logo, picture and stuff. That's what I called it. Isaac Westmoreland. IWP stands for Isaac Westmoreland Press.
Oh, okay.
But he was a bootmaker.
Yeah, I heard that too, but he never. Okay, was he literate?
He was. As a matter of fact, one of my prized possession is a invitation that he wrote out in his own copperplate to his daughter's wedding, which is my grandmother's wedding.
Mhm.
Isaac Westmoreland invites you to the daughter, blah, blah, blah. Anyway,
So how did he become literate?
I don't know. I assume that, I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
But he was literate, because I've seen things that he's written. I saw that invitation that he had written.
Thank you. That was so interesting. 2 questions. When you got the house in Southland Park Hills,
Mhm.
was there any problem after the white person bought it?
Not really. I mean, not really. There were, when we went to school, which was Alice Burney at the time, was a school that we went to, and there were, my sister and I were the only 2 blacks at the school, as I recall, at that time. And, and there was a country club not far away, right on Southland Park Hills. It was the South something. We were not invited to join, that I recall.
The second question is about writing the play.
Mhm.
What was your process for going ahead and writing the
Well, I've
play?
written, I was a journalist all my life, so I wrote anyway. I went to the theater a lot. I used to go to Ashland a lot to see plays up there, till the fires or just the fire. Anyway, I went to Ashland a lot, and I saw so many plays, most of them I saw a lot of black plays, a lot of, August Wilson was one, and there was another play called Ruined about rape, and it was really heart-wrenching. And I went to the folks there and I said, you guys, I've been black all my life. It ain't that bad. We're not that sad, right? You guys ought to write, a play on using my mother's book, because, as my daughter used to say, she wrote about happy Black people. But anyway, what the point is that, and they looked at me and they said, write it, you go write it. So I went home and I wrote it. And my daughter actually, at that time, my daughter and I and my mother were going around doing book events. And this is before my mother died. And she gave me the frame for the play, which is, it starts with a book event, right? It's my mother and me going to a book event. And then the book event unfolds and becomes bits and pieces of our actual lives. I went to City College and took a class on playwriting by a guy named Luther Hansen. If any of you go and do some writing stuff, he helped tremendously.
Anyone else? Okay, now you can go. So, Ginger, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for all that you've done for Renaissance. Some of you may have seen Ginger this summer during our summer series, and then earlier today. And we really appreciate your help.